Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Retail Bakers of America Baking Techniques webinar with Chef Colette Christian. My name is Marissa Serta-Chavili, and I'm the Education and Certification Director at the Retail Bakers of America. The Retail Bakers of America is a national nonprofit trade association that focuses on supporting the success of the baking industry. We are a community of bakers, educators, business owners, cake decorators, and students from across the country. It is our mission at the RBA to provide a community for idea sharing and networking, as well as support education and excellence in the industry. This particular education session has been made possible by the Washington Red Raspberry Commission. Washington State produces approximately 90% of the nation's frozen red raspberry crop. And today we're going to be seeing that product featured in chocolate raspberry bread made by Chef Colette. The Washington Red Raspberry Commission is a really incredible resource if you haven't checked it out. You can go to the website redraz.org. I will put that in the chat and download their free baking and pastry with Washington Red Raspberries toolkit for tips, baking formulas, and more. I am very excited to introduce Chef Colette Christian. Chef Colette is a certified master baker who began working in restaurants at the age of 14. Chef Colette earned her degree at the New England Culinary Institute in Vermont and a bachelor's in fine arts from the Art Institute of Chicago. For many years, Chef Colette worked in upscale restaurants, luxury hotels, as well as running a bed and breakfast. She also ran a successful wedding cake business. Currently, Chef Colette is working as a chef instructor for the Augusta Scoffier School of Culinary Arts, teaching baking and pastry. She has previous experience teaching at the Cordon Bleu College in Pasadena, California, as well as the Art Institute of Hollywood. And that is just skimming the surface of Chef Colette's many accomplishments. So we are very fortunate and excited to have her here with us today. Chef Colette, I am going to turn it over to you so you can show us how to make this delicious bread.
Thank you, Marissa. Welcome everyone to my kitchen. I am Hollywood adjacent. I'm located in the heart of Los Angeles, California. And that's my segue to tell you that I'm going to begin to teach this bread in flashback, because that's what we do in Hollywood. We work in flashback. So a little bit of quick background about the chocolate raspberry bread. And you'll find as I go through the process, it's a really rather straightforward, straight dough method bread, but it was sort of how we came about developing it and why that's really super interesting. And when you're looking to customize a yeasted dough and you want to work with something like frozen red raspberries to add flavor to your dough, what changes do you need to make, and what do you need to look out for? Where are we really looking to troubleshoot this particular dough? We got a great result with this. It took a couple of tests, and it really kind of, I really had to work my brain around this one, because this bread was actually designed for one of our certifications, one of our undisclosed items. And we were being sponsored by the Washington Red Raspberry, I wanted to say foundation, but Marissa, that's commission. And we wanted to do our best to highlight this product, not just, skim the surface of the red raspberries, but really have them be front and center in this bread. Now, for me, I started my California baking career working for a company called Il Fornaio, and they had a chain of Italian restaurant and bakeries in Southern California. They're still around, but at the time, this was early 90s, Il Fornaio packed a big punch in on the West Coast. And they had very authentic, you couldn't get any more authentic Italian baked goods at the time, period, full stop. And from time to time, we would feature a chocolate bread. Now, the Italian bakers are really good at crafting chocolate breads, sometimes using pre-ferments, sometimes not using pre-ferments. So when this idea came along, this chocolate raspberry bread, immediately I thought back to my Il Fornaio baking days, which really shaped the the first half of my serious baking career. Marissa mentioned that I started working in restaurants at the age of 14, and that is correct. I'm a Chicago native. I worked in this really lovely health food cafe on the weekends, and my interest in working in restaurants and baking and cooking was actually spawned by a bread baking class in high school. So it's funny where it's like the butterfly effect, you know what I mean? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that my inspiration came from how my exposure at Il Fornaio and Italian bakers crafting these really delicious, not too sweet, great companions to butter and jam chocolate breads. All right, enough blah, blah, blah. Let's get into the meat of things. So I have Magic of TV. I have a finished loaf to show you at the end of the demo. And then in the proof box, I have a loaf ready to go in the oven. Now this is a test batch, and the formula that is the link to the formula we have, and this will make one large boule, which will fit really perfectly in a good sized Banneton mold. So let me just grab this. Now I'm doing it a little bit differently because I'm using my Le Creuset 4-quart cast iron Dutch oven as my bread baker. I did have a Le Pan bread baker. Maybe you've seen the cloche sort of bell type thing, but I lost that one in my ex-husband took that, but it's okay, no worries. He left me the Le Creuset, so we're good to go. The Le Creuset is the Dutch oven has been preheated at 440 degrees in the oven for the past half hour. So I'm going to pull that out, and then I'm going to show you how I load this test boule into the oven. Now you can bake this on a Hearthstone, no problem. You can flour your Banneton mold and unmold it. It works well, but I just find, especially in a home oven where getting a little bit of steam in is always kind of dicey, I really like using my Dutch oven. So I'm just looking here. Let me just grab my oven mitts and I am going to pull that out.
And I just want to note that everyone should have received the formula via email this morning, which is that test batch size, but there's also the percentage there if you needed to scale up for high volume production available to you as well. If for whatever reason you did not receive the formula, just email me at marissa@retailbakersofamerica.org and I'll make sure to get that to you.
So the Dutch oven is hot, and again, if you have a bread baker, you know, the preheating is always the same. I just find that this works really well when using a bread baker, is to actually line it with a little bit of to set up your proof so you have parchment paper, because sometimes it'll stick in the baker. But what I'm going to do first is so I don't burn myself, especially burn myself on camera, that would be embarrassing. I'm going to slash this bread, and also I want to pull it out of the Banneton. And again, this size loaf, it's about roughly 1,000 grams wet dough weight. By the time you're done, maybe a little bit less. You know how we would love it to be exact, but it kind of varies. It is for this. It's about a 12-inch Banneton mold. You can always scale up or down depending on the equipment that you have. But what I'm going to do, and you have two ways to garnish this bread, I feel. You can dust a little flour and slash, or you could do an egg white wash, beat up an egg white really well until it's nice and fluid, and then crystal sugar or sanding sugar would be a really nice touch. because this bread is not too sweet. And when I was working on the formula, I have to say 2 things were really a challenge: the correct amount of sweetness and the correct amount of raspberry. Again, we wanted to show off the beautiful raspberry flavor. But I'm just going to do a flour wash. And the other thing too, for those of you who love to do decorative slashing, this particular loaf is the right texture. Sometimes if our hydration levels are too high and we want to do pretty decorative slashing, we still get a drag because the dough is just a little bit too wet. I do have a tip for that. All right. And I can't take full credit. I got this from a really great friend of mine, Michael Colante. He's a baker, and I learned this from him. If you're really into decorative slashing, let your loaves sit just exposed to the air for 5 minutes before you slash, and you'll find you'll have better definition. I'm obsessed with slashing, and I'm obsessed with lambs, and this one is kind of cool. I got this as a gift, and it's just kind of a razor. You've got to be very careful. It's not something you want to leave hanging around, but I'm just going to do a quick little pretty, and then just around the edge to open it up. I don't like to ever go over a slash, but I kind of shorted that edge. Now what I'm gonna, so that looks kind of pretty. And I mean, you could go all sorts of crazy with your slash. And again, you'll see when we mix this dough, it's sexy. It's really got a beautiful texture. I think you guys are gonna like it. All right, and you can also make rolls with it, which could be a super interesting addition to a bread basket if that's part of your business. All right, so again, I have that little parchment paper, which was very lightly oiled and crumpled to conform to the bowl and the hot Dutch oven. And we're gonna go in at 440 for 10 minutes. And then I'm gonna drop it to 425 and finish the bake. Now it's large. It's a very large bowl, not quite a, we're kind of, we're not too big, but not our usual size. I feel it's pretty generous. So this is gonna take at least 40 minutes to bake. Now, everybody's oven is different, so you guys know your ovens, so just adjust accordingly. But we are looking for 205, 210 on an instant read thermometer for a finish. This one, we don't want it to be underbaked at all. That would not be good. So again, 205, 210. I can't say that it's going to feel relatively light. I have taught bread for so many years. That would be, one way we would tell students that their bread was done, by a feeling of that excess moisture being baked out. This one won't quite feel relatively light, but it'll feel a little bit lighter. And again, looking for that 205 or 210 on an instant read thermometer. There was a question about this as a breakfast bread. And I just, I had a thought when that question came in. This could be adapted for like a cinnamon roll. Definitely. I don't know if that was the question or the thought, but I would say absolutely yes. Now, the other thing, and that just brings this to mind as well, there's no fat in this dough, but there's no reason that a small percentage of fat, like softened butter, couldn't be added to the dough, which would make it which would make the texture a little bit softer. When I cut into the loaf at the end of the demo, you'll see the texture of the finished loaf, which is almost a little bit like a chocolate sourdough, little bit more of a hearth bread sort of texture. And just to piggyback off of that, before I start mixing this dough and talking about mixing, there is no reason why you couldn't convert this to a sourdough if that's your passion. You absolutely could. You could do that. And that's something we did consider when we were working on this bread. But then for those of you who have certified, you know that time slips sideways. And we also wanted to make things relatively straightforward for our chefs who were certifying. So, okay, now let's talk about what we're working with. I have my mise en place right here. And I just want to show you, I'm using frozen raspberries. I'm very fortunate to have a Trader Joe's by me. So these are Trader Joe's frozen raspberries. And I thawed them overnight in the refrigerator. So here's the thing. We know with our yeasted doughs, we want to sort of have an idea. We want to control our rate of fermentation. And the way we do this is to figure out our desired dough temperature. Well, how do you manage when you're working with a product that's quite cold coming out of the refrigerator? I definitely calculated my water temperature. And for this loaf, that's very, very important. If you don't do that, it will still work, but your bulk fermentation may take forever. It will take a really long time. It'll take a while. So let's talk about that. So when we know when we're calculating our water temperature, we need to take the temperature of the ingredients that we're using. So I'm just going to go through that with you. And then the one ingredient that is easy for us to adjust is, of course, the water. I'm not going to start putting raspberries in the microwave. I'm not going to start doing anything like that. So the first thing we're going to do, and I'm just going to do a quick recap on how to do this, just in case you might have questions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just turn on our thermometer, and it's going to give us the temperature of the room. And I have to say, my apartment started out quite cold this morning when I mixed the batch that was in the oven. Right now, I'm at 79 degrees. It's actually pretty cold in LA. So 79 is our air temperature. Then we're going to take our flour temperature. And you might think to yourself, it always seems, I have students ask me, my Escoffier students will say, well, chef, the flour's in the room. Why isn't it the same? Well, the flour can be, it can be cooler, depending on where it's sitting in your kitchen, could be in a remote shelf. If you're working with whole wheat flour, you might have it in your fridge or your freezer to keep it nice and fresh. So, there's variables. Now my flour, the kitchen is warm, but my flour is coming in, it was off in a corner at 73 degrees. So that's important for us to know. So the raspberries are going to be the next temperature. And this is just the same as if we were calculating a water temperature and we had a pre-ferment. Instead of a pre-ferment, we have these raspberries. Now they've been out for a few minutes, so they're not going to be refrigerator cold, but this thermometer is dropping. It's still going. I love one of those instant ones. This one's pretty good. I can't throw shade, but I'd love it if it was just a little bit faster. So I'm coming in at 54 degrees for my raspberries. All right, so now, and if you look on the formula, I have a desired dough temperature of 78 degrees. So because we're calculating 4 ingredients, 78 times 4 is going to give us 312. And everything's going to hinge off that 312. If you're calculating a water temperature in its straight dough method and no pre-ferment or frozen raspberries, you're going to calculate that temperature on 3. Your factor will be 3, but because we have the raspberries, our factor is 4. So what we're going to do right off the bat is we are going to take that 312 and I'm going to subtract 79. And this is always fun to do on camera. And that's going to come out to be 233. And then I'm going to subtract the 73. That's easy, thank goodness. That's going to come out to be 160. Then 54 for the raspberries is 106. And then last but not least, the friction factor of the mixer. Now your regular 5-quart stand mixer, the friction factor calculated by all the manufacturers, because they like to keep the press release nice and clean, for a regular improved 6-minute mix, that number is 22. Now, so I'm going to subtract 22, and that means my water temperature needs to be 84 degrees in order for me to have a DDT of 78 when we're done mixing. So now I need to work on getting my water temperature to 84 degrees. And the good thing about this recipe, it really worked out that the amount of raspberries and the amount of water are the same. So that's pretty handy. And also I want to show you, let me just adjust my camera. I'm using a mix of berries and juice, and I haven't pureed them. There's really no need. And if any texture with the raspberries remains, it's a phenomenal addition to the bread. So I'm just going to grab my scale here really quickly and then just double check. And if there's any questions about calculating a water temperature, please let me know in the comments, because it's such an important step. So I need 176. And I'm going to use, I actually cheated. I kind of knew what I needed to be at before. I didn't want to waste time, because it can take a little bit of time going back and forth. And I do keep water in the fridge so that I can adjust pretty easily. Let's see if we're close. Because the thing is, we don't want to shock the yeast. And that's one great thing about, whoops, hold on. I'm going to drop the temperature to 425, and I'm going to set the timer for a little bit more time, at least. I know it's going to take, I've baked this so many times, tested so many times, I'm going another 30 minutes. All right, so we have, yep, I can live with it. We're at right around 83, 84 degrees, and we're going to start mixing this dough. So what happens is, by calculating the water temperature, and I have the temperature of the berries and the temperature of the water before I add the yeast is 75 degrees, which is great. That's nice and balmy for the yeast. You know, we really expect a lot of instant yeast. And I remember, if those of you who know Chef Leanne, she's an absolute genius. And I remember when I was certifying, her impromptu lecture on instant yeast, and how, as versatile as it is, it can still be shocked. We still have to take care. And she had made this excellent point that if the water is like in the low 50s or lower, even our beloved instant yeast can go into shock, just like we jumped into a cold lake. So the 75 is fine. The yeast is going to be really happy in this pool of raspberries and water at 75 degrees. The other thing with instant yeast, and I know, and I absolutely know, I feel I was there, when instant yeast was born and came to the United States. I know exactly where I was when I started working with it. Prior to that, we just had active dry or cake yeast. And cake yeast was always problematic because it had such a short shelf life. It is really cool though, and we all know that if you get cake yeast that's really fresh, you get tremendous volume in your product, but it's a slippery slope. Anyhow, I digress. But I know we can add instant yeast to dry ingredients and we get we get a good result. But if you hydrate your instant yeast, just like you hydrate yourself before working out, the yeast is going to be able to perform more effectively. So I know you might not have that time and you might be like rolling your eyes, but it really is beneficial for the yeast. So 5 minutes is fine. And then you come back and we're going to start mixing. And I'm going to, because it's demo, we're going to do a Hollywood 5 minutes. 5 minutes have passed and we're back. And I'm going to go ahead and start mixing. The sweetener I decided to use when we were designing this bread was honey. And the reason is there's a small amount of whole wheat flour, which just gives the loaf a little bit of extra depth. And maybe it's because I was a kid in the 70s and baking heavy loaves of whole wheat bread from my high school bread baking class. It was drilled into me that honey and whole wheat are natural partners and they really show each other off. But that doesn't mean you couldn't use other sweeteners. You could use brown sugar, you could use agave, you could use brown rice syrup. We are in a whole new world these days with sweeteners. But that was the reason that I chose honey. If you're using a liquid sweetener, the amount would be 1-for-1. And I would really recommend if you do make any changes, keep it a liquid sweetener. Though brown sugar does have more moisture than granulated, and if we do need to sub for honey, that's usually and we don't have a liquid sweetener to sub with, that would be your natural go-to. And I have to apologize, you guys. I'm absolutely obsessed with ingredient function, so I can go on and on about it. I would love to have a baking show where all I did was talk about ingredient function, but I think it'd be so boring, no one would watch. All right, again, I digress, and we're back to, let's recap. We have the water, we have the raspberries, we have the yeast, we had our magical Hollywood 5 minutes, we added the honey, and now I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients, keeping the salt for last. I'm not one to mix everything together. I know that works for dry ingredients. It's totally a viable option. I'm just a control freak, and I like to see my salt. So we have the bread flour, and I'm using gold medal, Better for Bread today. We have Dutch processed cocoa, and I have to say, Hershey's has not let us down with the special dark. I know I've used every kind of cocoa imaginable, and I have to say it's pretty good. Now I have everything but the salt, and that's going in there. And again, if you wanted to add fat to this to soften the crumb structure, you could absolutely go ahead and maybe add 2 ounces of softened sweet cream, unsalted butter. I think that would be really lovely. You might want to mix though and add the fat at the second mix, just so we have some gluten development before the fat would grease the gluten strands. I don't think that would make that much of a difference. It wouldn't really change things very much at all. And again, for the breakfast question, if you wanted to use this as a cinnamon roll dough, that would be They would be a little bready as is as a cinnamon roll. I saw a question come through, but I'm going to just start the mix because I want to explain this. This might be something you do all the time, but what I find is I like to start on speed 2, and that's the way the directions are written, because I want to make sure the dough comes into a cohesive mass quickly and the ingredients are well combined and starting that mix, and our gluten is starting to develop evenly, instead of starting on a lower speed where the dough, where there's a struggle. The one thing, it's 2024. Let's make this the year of no struggle, at least in our baking. When you start mixing this, you might feel like you need to adjust the moisture, but be patient. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix for 3 minutes on speed 2. So I'm going to actually set a little timer here. And we have to stick to the times. Unfortunately, in a test situation with a stand mixer, there's no timer on it. In your pro setting, you'll have your timer, and that just makes things so easy. I used to be a KitchenAid brand ambassador, and I asked about why they never had the timer function added to their smaller mixers. And the question came from KitchenAid. They wanted to make sure that there was, things were kept simple and that a timer could break, and they didn't want that to happen. Anyway, so set a timer like I did. And while it's mixing, let me just check the questions. Great. So Snickerdoodle, how would this dough work as a breadstick? Fabulous. I think it would work really well as a breadstick. What would be nice, I think, is that brushing them with egg whitewash and the sugar before twisting, like we do for cheese straws. I think that could really give it some nice texture and interest. If you try it, please tag RBA if you're on social media so we can see. And that goes for everybody. If you make the chocolate raspberry bread, we'd love to see it. Yes, and then to piggyback off the breadstick question, the cocoa went in before the salt. Again, I like to watch my salt, and I like to do the salt last. That's probably just habit. I know lots of bakers, amazing bakers, like to whisk the salt and flour together, but I just prefer to add it at the end. Sean, this is a great question. Is there fat in the cocoa? No, there's no saturated fat in the cocoa. The cocoa butter has been removed, and this is just basically dried chocolate. I know chocolate is a little, a little challenging, it can be a little confusing. No, there's no fat in the cocoa. Now, I thought about adding melted chocolate, like my brain was spinning, but no, it gets messy. But just Sean, to piggyback onto that, my timer just went off. Wow, I talked about cocoa for 3 minutes. I tell you, I could put everybody to sleep talking about cocoa. All right.
We love all your information, Colette, by the way. We have a whole room of bakers here, and we love the ingredient information. So
thank you.
No worries.
So we were 3 minutes on speed 2. This is a classic 6-minute improved mix. And we are going 2 minutes on speed 1. Okay, another question about, oh yes, so Snickerdoodle, that was the whole wheat flour. that went in before the cocoa. And by the way, you could use rye. If rye will also work. Just change the flavor a little bit, but I had to use it when I was out of whole wheat flour in my testing. And it was pretty good. I prefer the whole wheat, but you could use rye. So that was the whole wheat flour. So Roy, great question. I really feel we don't need to worry too much about cacao percentages in our cocoa. But what you are concerned with are the flavor profiles of particular Dutch processed brands. Most Dutch processed cocoa is pretty much equal, except, well, that maybe not equal, but because we do have luxury brands that would be like saying your canvas toast. I'm gonna have the Valrhona people after me, but
Say that just one more time. We lost you for just 1 second there. You froze.
oh, okay.
second.
Can you guys can you
Yes.
see me now?
Yes, you're back on now.
All right. So my last comment, I think I froze, was not all cocoa brands are equal. Some are definitely more posh. And as I said, I've used all of them. It is their depth of flavor that sets them apart. There is, and in my opinion, the top really posh cocoa is Valrhona Poudre de Cacao. It's pricey, but it really has a beautiful flavor. The second runner-up would be Callebaut or Cocoa Berries Extra Brut is really quite good. But honest to God, and this is a pandemic discovery, because I was pre-pandemic, I worked my regular full-time, you know how bakers are, we've got a million jobs. But my weekend job, I worked at a flagship Sur La Table teaching baking classes on the weekend. And at my fingertips, I had incredibly posh brands. I was free pouring Nielsen Massey vanilla bean paste out of a quart jar. I was living a fairy tale life. Then the pandemic hit. The job was gone in an instant, and there were no baking ingredients to be had, certainly no posh ones. You all remember that. And so I rediscovered my American Hershey's Special Dark, and we have been literally together ever since. So that was really a long-winded story to say, experiment, see which brands you like. But if price is a concern, then I really heartily endorse this Hershey's Special Dark. Macarons, this chocolate bread, like super, super accessible on your supermarket shelf. All right. Now, let's recap. I did my 3-minute I did speed 2 for 3 minutes, speed 1 for 2 minutes. Now I'm going to go speed 1. I just threw in the chocolate chips. You could chop up your chocolate. You could use white chocolate. You know, you're the chef in your kitchen. This is an inclusion. This is a particulate. You know, it's up to you. These are just regular chocolate chips. And you just want to mix for that minute until till they're combined. I'm not a real fan of mixing in particulates or inclusions by hand unless we're working with something that's kind of sloppy and we really need control. But if they're a drier particulate, we have the mixer. I was married to a Michelin-starred chef who used to always say, well, he worked in Michelin kitchens, he used to always say, look, if Escoffier would have had a mixer or a food processor or a Robocoo, he definitely would have used it. So, all right, now I want to show you, let me show you this dough. So this is after our 6-minute mix, and it's really, I'm in love with this dough. It's so gorgeous. And we have pretty good development at that six minutes. So, and I'm just gonna, no flour down, no flour on my hands. I like to just, this isn't always realistic with large batches, I know, but one thing to think about, and this is something I learned years ago working at Il Fornaio, we always need to consider, and I'm sure you do, because, one thing about bakers is we bake with heart. All of us. I can't think of any member that yeast is alive. So there is a little bit of connectivity between us and this wonderful, incredible ingredient that is going to transform into our lovely chocolate raspberry bread. So I just smooth it out, give it a little bit of love, and now it's going to go in the proofer. And I'm just going to grab my bowl out of the cupboard. Now there's no fat in the dough, so that's kind of a problem. And I hate pan spray. I have to tell you guys, I think it's kind of evil. I know it's in part of our industry, but if I don't have to use it, I don't. So let's get back to that fat in the dough idea. I learned this from Jeffrey Hamelman in a class years ago up in Vermont. He had this mantra: the fat in the dough is the fat in the bowl. So there's butter in the dough, there's butter in the bowl. Olive oil in the dough, olive oil in the bowl. But we don't have any fat, so it's your choice. I'm gonna do butter. You could do nothing. You could just throw it in the bowl and dig it out with your bowl scraper, preferably your RBA bowl scraper. Okay, and I'm just gonna upside down, right side up. Now, I had a Broad and Taylor proofer literally drop into my life like a sign from God. I know that sounds dramatic, but I do live in LA, and we're very dramatic here, and well, at least I am. And I really do love my proofer. And if you have the budget, I highly recommend, because in our private kitchens, it gives us a little bit of proofing control. Of course, if you're in a commercial setting, you have a proof box, you're like, whatever. But if you don't, I can't recommend it enough. It is a little bit on the pricey side. It's an investment. I'm just going to mark my time, 10:45 here in LA, so that I have an idea. I have an idea. I don't lose track. The other thing, so I'm going to pop it in my proofer, and in the winter time, I set the proofer to 81 degrees. This proof box, I'm sorry, it's off camera. It's big, like a bread box. It collapses down, but be kind of, well, I can show you the lid. This is the size, this is the lid, and I'm going to throw this in here. Gives us a little bit more control. But as I said, it's a little bit on the pricey side. I do have an inexpensive alternative if you're doing test batches at home, or if you find that right now your baking is more central, you're working in your kitchen. And that is these large Ziploc bags. They come 4 to a box. I get them off of Amazon, and you can you can bulk ferment and proof in these bags with, usually I'll put my large Pyrex measure half full of like boiling water, slide that in the bag. And it's a very inexpensive way to proof at home. And then you can see this, I wipe them out, I dry them really well, I fold them back and put them in the box, and they last for a really long time. So those are my 2 ways of proofing, proofing without a proof box. A proof box, having access to a proof box is a truly wonderful thing. All right, we have a few more minutes on this, and then a few more minutes, just checking time here. Marissa, I think we're doing okay. So I'm gonna just grab the cutting board and the bread knife, and I'm gonna cut into the finished loaf. So, and then if time allows, I'll show you what this looks like when it comes out of the oven. And then questions in the chat, keep them coming.
We have one here that asks if you tried substituting any other flours besides traditional wheat flour or whole wheat that didn't have gluten. This is Snickerdoodle. She has about sorghum or any other types of flours you might have tested this with.
I have not. Though this could be made gluten-free, and I have to tell you, in my gluten-free baking, which has my gluten-free yeasted bread experience, came from developing recipes for Escoffier so that we would have gluten-free versions that went with our yeasted versions in our bread classes. It's incredibly challenging to, as we all know, to mimic wheat flour. But there is a brand I have to give a shout out to, gluten-free Jules flour. This blend works so well for yeasted doughs. So just to piggyback onto for Snickerdoodle, what's different when we bake gluten-free is our mixing process is different. We work with the paddle, not the dough hook. We end up with a dough that's a little bit more like a heavy batter, not like a dough that we could knead necessarily, though there are exceptions. So it would take a little bit of testing. I would probably I would drop the recipe in half for testing, so I wasn't wasting my gluten-free flour. But what we need to be so careful, and in reality, I'm so grateful that I was asked to develop those gluten-free yeasted dough recipes, because the learning was off the charts. Not only in learning about mixing and learning about more of a timed proof, and this bread would probably need to be made in a vessel, like a 3-inch cake pan, as opposed to more of a free-form loaf, but it could definitely be done. But I have to say that my partner in crime on that project, Chef Gina Laura, our lives changed when we discovered Jules gluten-free flour, because your 1-for-1 gluten-free flours will not hold up in a yeasted dough recipe. And the good people at Bob's Red Mill, they have a heavier, they call it all-purpose flour, and it is derived almost exclusively from garbanzo beans and some tapioca, oh my God, xanthan gum, tapioca is added to it. Sorry, my brain just froze. But your product, because it's so heavy garbanzo bean, your product tastes like beans. And that's a problem. If you're making a savory flatbread, great. If you're in the south of France and you're making soca, which is this lovely bread they have in the south of France, which reminds me I need to go soon to the south of France and have some, then the beanie, sure, the bean's great. But if you're trying to do a gluten-free bread and using, again, I'm so happy that it is available. The beanie is off-putting. The Jules gluten-free, I have some right here. Snickerdoodle, this is a miracle if you haven't already tried it. All right, and lots of great resources on their website to back up everything I've said. Okay, I hope that was helpful. And then, Oh yeah, oh sorry, Snickerdoodle. So I meant the additional wheat flour, not the total. I don't know why I'm not sure. Okay, couple things. You could use all bread flour. That would be fine. But the problem is if you substituted a gluten-free, what's our percentage? It's 20% whole wheat. If you substituted gluten-free, what would happen potentially is you could lose structure. And if you look at this finished loaf, let me pull it out of its baggie. I love clothespins. They're so versatile. Anyway, that was just a plug for the clothespin industry. Look at this. This is our finished loaf. It's really kind of a gorgeous, very earthy, again, very reminiscent of the Italian loaves that we used to sell at Il Fornaio. And also Carol Field's amazing, still in print, The Italian Baker. She has, they call them pane di cioccolato. And they're usually seasonal. It's not something you'd find in Italy, my experience. You don't find them like all the time in Italian bakeries. They're a little bit more seasonal and festive. Just toasted with butter and good jam, fabulous. But look at that, really pretty, really kind of very nice. And then again, this batch that's in the proofer, I'm going to shape into rolls, and I'm going to Marissa, I'll post it and tag you tomorrow so I'll send it to you so you can see what this dough looks like shaped into. I'm thinking some really cute and kind of sexy baby batards would be really nice. So anyway, let me show you this texture, this bread. I baked this late yesterday afternoon and I didn't freeze it. Normally I freeze, if it's longer than overnight, I freeze. And I didn't sieve the raspberries. I wish you guys were here so you could smell it. There was a question about sieving the raspberries. You could puree them, but if they're left, some of them are left just thawed, we do get a little bit of texture. I don't know if you can see a little bit of raspberry in there, which is really quite fun. You know, I had real delusions of grandeur when we were working on this project of trying to get some pink in there, but that didn't quite work. But the flavor is there, and there's a little bit of a ghost of texture, which is kind of nice. So that's the finished loaf. We're at 12 seconds. Let me just put down a towel so I don't burn my cutting board. And we'll pull this out, and it might not be done. I know we're just about ready on time, and I want to just catch any final questions, but it's kind of exciting, the unveiling. We got great volume. It's not quite done. I have to put it back. And one thing, because I was teaching and talking and I forgot halfway through, if you're working with the Dutch oven, about 25 minutes in, I know most people say 20, but 25 is better, trust me. We want to uncover, but look at this volume. It's really quite gorgeous. We can take a temperature, but I can just tell that it's not done yet. It's squidgy. That's a technical term, squidgy. No. Forget it. This is going back in without the cover, and then we'll wrap everything up. Now you might be thinking, maybe someone is typing the question as I am doing this. Maybe we're like, we're like telepathic at this point. When you know something isn't ready, but you've already gone pretty long into the bake. I recommend testing, setting 7 to 10 minutes, depending on the size of the item. If it's a smaller item, of course, it would be less time. But something like a yeasted dough, especially if we've pulled it out, mucked around a little bit with it, taken a temperature, and then put it back in, it does need some recovery time. So that's why I set the timer for like 10 minutes actually, and then I'll go back in and check. So anyway, Marissa, are there questions? Oh, yes.
There's some comments here. Thank you, Sean. It does look beautiful, Chef Colette. Absolutely. This was a wonderful demonstration. Like Chef Colette said, I had the pleasure of tasting this bread at the Certified Master Baker exam, and there's a subtle sweetness. It's somewhat savory. There's those inclusions in there, and it's really a special recipe that you formulated.
Well, it was really fun. I love crafting recipes, and this was it's the equivalent was read to me just a few too many times when I was little. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. You can I'm on social media if you want to reach out. My Instagram is bakingwcolette, and my website is bakingwithcolette.com. And I really can't thank you, Marissa. It was great to be with you and be with everybody and explain the bread. I hope you're inspired to bake today.
Thank you so much for everyone for being here, and make sure you go to retailbakersofamerica.org and check out our other upcoming events.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Tomorrow, I promise. Bye.
Bye.